Vijayadasa Rajapaksa opposes 20th Amendment to the Constitution.
අනාගතයේදී ක්‍රියාත්මක කරගන්නට බැරි විකෘති අංගවිකල ව්‍යවස්ථාවක් බවට පත්වෙන සංශෝධනයක් තමයි විශ්ව සංශෝධනයෙන් ඉදිරිපත් කරලා තියෙන්නේ.
SLFP and SLPP hold discussions. Agreement reached to strengthen existing relations. Former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, testifying at the Presidential Commission of Inquiry, says he was not invited to attend Security Council meetings between October 2018 and April 2019. China and the United States at loggerheads over Sri Lanka.
Good evening and welcome to Primetime News on TV1. On to our lead story now. A quarantine curfew was imposed from 6 p.m. in the Gampa police jurisdiction today. Issuing a statement, the police headquarters said that the curfew in the Minuwangoda, Devulapitiya and Veyangoda police divisions will continue to be in effect until further notice. This was after the number of patients in the COVID-19 cluster in Minuwangoda rose to 466 today. The total number of COVID-19 patients at the garment factory at which the first patient was identified has risen to 567.
Lieutenant General Shavendra Silva has requested the employees of the garment factory in Minuwangoda to remain indoors regardless of where they are currently residing.
Minuwangoda Brandik Karmanta Shalawa hi seveniutu.
We wish to request all employees at the Brandix factory in Minuwangoda to remain indoors regardless of where you are currently residing. We also request the family members of these employees to avoid going outside and instead to undergo self-quarantine at your homes. The family members of all employees at the Brandix factory who had contracted the virus are undergoing quarantine at quarantine centers managed by the army. We are requesting everyone to lend their support to the quarantine procedures that are being carried out by the army. Health authorities said that none of the patients belonging to the COVID-19 cluster in Minuwangoda have developed serious symptoms of the virus. We are certain that we can bring this situation under control. In order to do that, we need the support of the public. There is a high risk that the virus can spread to the community due to the current situation. If the people do not extend their support, we will not be able to bring this situation under control. If that happens, the virus will spread rapidly among the general public. This would lead to a massive wave of infections. This can be disastrous. When identifying the close contacts of these patients, we came across certain instances in which people cannot divulge personal details on the areas visited by them or the people who they have met. However, at this time, we are looking at this issue through an epidemic viewpoint and not through any other lens.
Meanwhile, issuing a statement, Brandik said that one of the main challenges the company experienced throughout this process is that a majority of the positive cases have proven to be asymptomatic or lacking a display of symptoms associated with COVID-19. The release added that Brandix will continue to engage with the relevant authorities and are doing their utmost to look into the care of those affected while transferring their family members and close contacts to quarantine centers. The release read, quote, "The well-being of our employees, communities and our nation continues to be our priority. We also remain truly appreciative of the support and counsel extended to us by the Presidential Secretariat, Ministry of Defence, Ministry of Health and Sri Lanka Army to navigate through this situation," unquote. The Health Ministry has urged the public to avoid all form of public gatherings across the country. Issuing a statement, the ministry stressed that exhibitions, large conferences, parties, indoor and outdoor events, carnivals, musical shows and processions should not be held until further notice. The statement that had been issued by the Acting Director General of Health Services, Dr. S. Sridharan, stated that the public must conduct themselves in a responsible manner by abiding by the directives that are imposed to curb the spread of COVID-19. The statement added that these regulations will continue to be in effect until the 31st of October and could be subject to change in the interim.
The next 48 hours are going to be crucial. The future course of action would be decided based on the results of the tests that are being carried out at present. The advanced level examination is scheduled to be held from the 12th of this month and the grade 5 scholarship examination from the 11th. The relevant arrangements have been made to conduct these examinations. However, the Education Ministry will arrive at a final decision in this regard based on the results of the PCR tests that are due tomorrow.
අධ්‍යාපන අමාත්‍යාංශය බලාපොරොත්තු ඔට්ටු වෙනවා.
සමාජීය මතයක් තියෙනවා මෙම ප්‍රමාණය වැඩි වුණොත් අද දවස තුල නැවත පොලිස් ඇඳිරි නීතිය පැනවීමට තීරණයක් ගන්නවද නැද්ද කියලා. ඒක පැහැදිලිව තීරණය කරලා තියෙනවද අමාත්‍ය මණ්ඩලයේ?
ඒ වාර්තාවන්
We will act according to the results of these reports.
තීරණ වලට යටත්ව තමයි අපි කතා කරන්නේ.
අපි අවට රටවල් ගණනාවක විශේෂයෙන් ඉන්දියාව වගේ රටක ඉතාම භයානක විදිහට
We informed the authorities that we are in a dangerous situation at a time the virus is spreading rapidly in countries like India. What we witnessed in the recent past was how effort made by the people of this country to eradicate the virus reduced when the number of cases started decreasing. As a result of that, a new situation has been created. The first issue is it has not been revealed anywhere about how the factory worker was infected. Some say that a group of Indians visited the factory. However, the factory denies it. Firstly, these must be resolved. There is a possibility that sub-clusters will be created from the main cluster. Patients have been reported from Jaffna, Kurunegala and Dahiyattakandiya. So we have to trace these places and conduct PCR tests and resort to aggressive testing. A person cannot be released just because the first PCR test result is negative. We are still trying to ascertain the gravity of this issue. So give us at least another 48 hours to determine how dangerous it is. Following a proper analysis, we will be able to announce our stance on the future course of action.
ඊට පස්සේ තමයි අපිට නිශ්චිත ක්‍රියාමාර්ග සම්බන්ධයෙන් යම් පැහැදිලි
Meanwhile, Dr. Jairwan Bandara has been removed from his position as the acting director of the Medical Research Institute in Borella. Accordingly, the deputy director of the institute, Dr. Prabhat Amarasekara, has been appointed to the post. Upon inquiries made by Newsfirst, Dr. Jairwan Bandara confirmed that he would serve as the deputy director of the Medical Research Institute from today.
The director of the Medical Research Institute, Dr. Jairwan Bandara, was removed from his position this morning. On what grounds was this done?
That was done by the ministry. That was an action that had been a result of a decision made by the internal administration of a ministry.
We received information that he had been removed from his position due to a dispute that arose over the purchase of PCR test kits. This is a very crucial moment. Is there political influence over this decision that has been made at a time when the third wave has begun?
There is absolutely no political influence. That is why I said it was only a decision made by the internal administration that concerns the health ministry and its affiliated bodies. I think that the minister in charge would be able to elaborate on this decision. Do not associate politics with everything.
The release of former Minister Rishad Badidin's brother, who was arrested over last year's April 21st attacks, figured in Parliament today. This was following a query raised by Samaga Janabalawege parliamentarian Chaminda Vijayasiri.
We saw that when the new government came into power, certain media reports were stating that the brother of a powerful former minister is directly involved in the attacks and that he had assisted in transporting explosives. However, recently it was said that he was not involved in it and that he had to be released. Will action be taken against these statements that contradict each other? Some are citing this as a precursor to joining the government.
The government does not have any involvement in this. This suspect had been arrested on the 19th of April this year over 7 phone calls that had taken place between him and the bomber at Cinnamon Grand who was involved during last year's April 21st attacks. He had been detained and questioned for 3 days based on a request made by a police superintendent in line with the relevant provisions. Under the provisions that allows a minister to extend the period of detention until 18 months, investigations were carried out after extending the term twice. The investigations that were carried out in line with these provisions did not indicate that the suspect had been linked to the bombings directly or indirectly and had been involved in terrorist activities. After preparing the relevant documents to revoke the detention order and sending them to the Defence Ministry on the 8th of September, he had been produced before the Judicial Medical Officer on the 29th and then been released. A separate unit has been established to investigate this. There are 18 phone calls that are under scrutiny. All those calls had been made from a ministry. It is believed that these calls were based on business activities. The last phone call had been made 3 months before the bombings. We haven't halted the investigations. We may arrest more individuals in future.
සමහර වෙලාවට තව ඉස්සරහදී තව අය
The faith placed on the police has deteriorated. They are now saying that he is not linked to the incident. This is a serious matter that shows that the individual concerned has been subjected to injustice.
We could have detained him until 18 months by extending the term by 3 months. What can you say about their rights? That can be done only if the investigators deem it necessary. We have tasked a Deputy Inspector General of Police to conduct a separate investigation over this.
Please explain the contradictory statements that have been made by the police spokesman.
The statements made by the police spokesman are not suitable. He should have made this remark as a police officer. They display media theatrics after investigations just like politicians do. That was wrong. We are investigating that as well.
ඔබතුමා ඒ වගේම ඊටාම තීරණාත්මක මාරු කිරීමක් සිද්ධ වුණා වැදගත් කාරණයක් සම්බන්ධයෙන් කොවිඩ් වලට සම්බන්ධ නැති වුණා CID එකේ ප්‍රධානියා නියෝජ්‍ය පොලිස්පති නුවන් වෙදසිංහ එතෙන්දී ඒක සම්බන්ධ වුණේ කෙලින්ම අර රිෂාඩ් බදුදීන්ගේ සහෝදරයා නිදහස් කිරීමත් එක්කම එතන මොකක් හරි ඒකට ජනාධිපතිතුමාගේ නියෝගයක් හොද වෙන දේශපාලන බලපෑමක් තියෙනවා
මේ සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම පොලිසියේ පරිපාලනය සම්බන්ධව තියෙන
This is something regarding the administration of the police. It is a question also related to the law. The courts and the administrative officers related to that should be asked that question.
සමහරක් විට පරිපාලන හේතුන් මත ඒ ක්‍රියාවලියට සම්බන්ධ වෙනවා.
එමතුමා දැන් ඔබතුමාලා කලින් ආණ්ඩුවට චෝදනා කරා CID එකේ ප්‍රධානීන් උපයෝගී කරගෙන තමයි දේශපාලනික කරුණු මත ඇතැම් පුද්ගලයන්ට නඩු පැවරුවේ ඇමරිකාවට. නමුත් දැන් මෙතනදිත් බරපතල ගැටලුවක් තියෙනවානේ. මේ රියාජ් බදුදීන් කියන පුද්ගලයාව මාස 6ක් විතර ඩිටෙන්ෂන් ඕඩර්ස් මත රඳවාගෙන හිටියා. ඔහු හදිසියෙම නිදහස් කරනවා. අපිට වාර්තා වෙන ආකාරයට ඔහුගේ බිරිඳත් එදා උදේ මේ ගේට්ටුව ගාවටත් ඇවිල්ලා ඉඳලා තියෙනවා. ඔහු රැගෙන යන්න. ඉතින් මේ නිලධාරීන්ගේ ක්‍රියාපටිපාටිය දුසාගත
I would like to clearly state that the President said that he does not intend to vest powers with politicians to arrest and release people based on their whims and fancies, like what happened during the previous regime. These decisions will be lawfully taken by the relevant authorities following adequate investigations. I wish to state that very clearly.
ඒකට උත්තරේ බොහොම පැහැදිලිව තියෙනවා.
පොලිස්පතිවරයෙක් පත් කර ගැනීමට ඔබතුමාලාට තියෙන 3-2 බලයට අනුව කිසි ගැටලුවක් නැහැ. පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ අනුමැතිය සහිතව ඒ කටයුත්ත කරන්න පුළුවන්. නමුත් තාමත් ඉන්නේ වැඩ බලන පොලිස්පතිවරයෙක්. ඇයි පොලිස්පතිවරයෙක් පත් කරගෙන
Although we received a 2/3 majority, it is wrong to do everything with that power because there is a process on how to do it. The 20th Amendment is coming. The situation might be different with that. We have been discussing about that. The inconveniences will be removed and it will end within 2 to 3 weeks. This should be allowed to proceed lawfully.
Sri Lanka Podujana Perumana parliamentarian Dr. Vijayadasa Rajapaksa spoke about the 20th Amendment to the Constitution at a media briefing today.
රටේ ආණ්ඩු ක්‍රම ව්‍යවස්ථාව සමස්තයක් වශයෙන්
The 20th Amendment to the Constitution is an amendment that would make the Constitution unworkable and a deformed Constitution in the future. In other words, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution is the silk route for Gotabaya Rajapaksa to ascend to the office of President. If not for the 19th Amendment, he wouldn't have even become a candidate for the presidential election, let alone become the President of this country. He is now trying to destroy the silk route that brought him to the office of President. It is clear that responsible members of our government have not yet understood the dangers behind this amendment. If the 20th Amendment is passed, the President will continue to strengthen his presidency during the coming 2 to 3 years. But the current President and the government has not understood that the current President will be slain by his successor using the very same sword that he sharpened. That is the danger here.
ඒක තමයි මේකේ තියෙන භයානකකම.
අගමැතිතුමාට ඒ කමිටුවේ වාර්තාව ලබා දුන්නා. ඒ කමිටුවේ වාර්තාවේ නිකාලෙත් නැහැ තාම.
අගමැතිතුමාට ප්‍රශ්න
If the Prime Minister didn't have a problem with it, he wouldn't appoint a committee. Quite frankly, the person who is losing the most amount of power is the current Prime Minister.
කප්පාදු වෙන්නේ වර්තමාන අගමැතිවරයාගේ.
ජනතාවගේ මතයක් තියෙනවා ඔබ අධිකරණ ඇමතිව නොහිටියා නම් වර්තමාන ජනාධිපති ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහත්මයා තාම බන්ධනාගාරගත වෙලා කියලා. මේක ඇත්තද?
දේශපාලඥයෝ බුරු කිව්වට ජනතාව බුරු කියන්නේ නැහැනේ. ජනතාව එහෙම කියනවා නම් ඒක ඇත්ත තමයි.
දැන් ඔබතුමා ප්‍රකාශ කරා මේ වත්මන් ජනාධිපතිවරයා මේ ජනාධිපති ධූරයට ගෙනෙන සේදමාවත තමයි 19 කියලා. මොකද්ද කොහොමද ඒක හැදුනේ?
18 වෙනි ආණ්ඩු
The limit on the number of terms the president can hold office was removed through the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. It was reintroduced through the 19th Amendment. So if not for the 19th Amendment, Gotabaya Rajapaksa wouldn't have even received nominations.
ඒකයි මම එහෙම කියන්නේ.
අමාත්‍ය ධූරය ලැබුණෙත් නැහැ. ඒ ගැන පොඩ්ඩක් හිතේ කනස්සල්ලක් තියෙනවා වගේ.
ඒ වෙලාවේ පොඩි කනස්සල්ලක් තිබුණා දැන් ලොකු සතුටක් තියෙනවා බාර නොගත් එක ගැන.
හොඳයි ඔබතුමා දැන් මේ විදිහට විශ්ස ආවොත් මොකද කරන්නේ අත උඩට යයිද?
ඒක පිළිබඳව මම තීරණය ගන්න.
I will have to look at this decision handed down by the Supreme Court on this matter before I can decide. There are express provisions in the Constitution that state that parliamentarians cannot delegate powers conferred on them through the Constitution. We have sworn an oath. If we are voting in favour of curbing the powers of the Parliament, then we are betraying that oath.
ඒ වෙනුවෙන් අපි අත උස්සනකොට අපි එහෙමනම් අපේ දියුරුම උල්ලංඝනය කිරීමක් වෙනවා.
ඒක ස්වාමීන් වහන්සේ කෙනෙක් ඊයේ මම හිතන්නේ පොලිස් කොමිසමටත් ගියා. දැන් එතන ගිහිල්ලා උන්වහන්සේ කතා කරන්නේ මේක මේ බැසිල් රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාවත් අරගෙන එයාවත් ගොඩ දාගන්න යන වැඩපිළිවෙලක් කියලා.
ආණ්ඩුවට සහයෝග දීපයාගෙන්
80 to 90% of those who supported the government are voicing their objection. This is not my opinion but the opinion of the Mahasangha. When the people elected President Mahinda Rajapaksa for a term of 6 years after he won the Great War, Basil Rajapaksa sent him home in 4 years and then went to the US. The Venerable Theros were of the opinion that Basil Rajapaksa would send the current president within 2 years as well and then go back to the US.
කියන මතය තමයි භික්ෂුන් වහන්සේලා අපිට කියන්නේ.
While Vijayadasa Rajapaksa expressed his opinion on the 20th Amendment in that manner, representatives of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party met with Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna stalwarts including Basil Rajapaksa today. The meeting, which was held at the headquarters of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, had centered around strengthening existing relations between the two parties and utilizing the alliance more effectively. A total agreement had been made in that regard. The SLPP announced that local government representatives in both parties will work in unison, while a committee will be appointed with representatives of both parties to work at a district level. An agreement has also been reached to provide representatives of both parties with equal opportunities to engage in development-related activities.
The United States has said that it would encourage Sri Lanka's partnership with China if it is open, transparent and mutually beneficent.
US Ambassador to Sri Lanka, Elena B. Teplitz, had told the Daily Mirror newspaper that Sri Lanka must not be vulnerable in its relationships with foreign nations. She had said that partnerships between countries should be open, transparent and mutually beneficent, and that Sri Lanka must not be vulnerable in its relationships. The ambassador had expressed critical views on the loans offered by China and said that fair competition over projects would reduce costs and ensure better quality. She observed that the terms of all but one loan offered by China to Sri Lanka under the Belt and Road Initiative had dictated that contracts and tenders must be awarded to Chinese firms alone. Ambassador Teplitz had cited agreements signed between Sri Lanka by the United States Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, as transparent ones. She insisted that the United States wants the people to know what it is doing in Sri Lanka and that it welcomes transparency. Further, the US ambassador brushed off claims that it is trying to dictate terms to Sri Lanka by stating that the US is a genuine friend that raises concerns when necessary. The statement issued by the Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka says, quote, "With great shock and strong discontent, the embassy learned about the US ambassador's interview with a local newspaper in which a foreign envoy from a third country openly played off China-Sri Lanka relations and severely violated the diplomatic protocol," unquote. The statement reads, "While it's always not surprising to see the United States interfered into a sovereign country's internal affairs, the general public is still astonished to witness its despicable attempt to manipulate others' diplomatic relations." It adds both China and Sri Lanka as independent countries have full right to develop relations with foreign countries according to our own need and will. How Sri Lanka and China engaged with each other has repeatedly stood the test of time. The statement says the government and the people of Sri Lanka have their own independent and fair judgment on the relations with China. The US has no power or obligation to lecture on China-Sri Lanka relations. Such naked hegemony, supremacy and power politics will neither be tolerated by the Chinese nor be accepted by Sri Lanka. The Chinese embassy in Sri Lanka says, "We strongly suggest the United States to quit the addiction of preaching others and applying double standards." It adds that it lists out, quote-unquote, 4 simple but helpful advisors to our arrogant friend from the other side of the world. Number 1. Do not slander other countries' work in fighting pandemic while topping the world in COVID-19 cases. Number 2. Do not pretend to be the guardian of free trade while violating the WTO rulings. Number 3. do not hold high the banner of transparency while covering up its controversial MCC agreement. Number 4, do not smear others' normal cooperation against sovereignty while bombing foreign countries, occupying overseas military bases and imposing unilateral sanctions.
Well, the foreign policy of an independent state is to be determined by the state itself, and the objective is to promote the well-being of its people and to defend its national interest. Now, the government is answerable only to its own people and not to some alien power. Now, if the relations between states is guided by the principles outlined in the UN Charter. Principles of the Charter is to maintain international peace and security, that is against war.
There are many strategies concerning the Indian Ocean. The USA has Indo-Pacific strategy. They are not even really a residential power in the Indian Ocean, but they have a strategy. Japan, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. India has some neighborhood first, Sagarmala, Sagar, look east, act east. Then Australia has something like a second sea strategy. China has the Belt and Road Initiative. India and Japan has Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. But where is Sri Lanka's initiative in this most important geographical location? As long as we are happy to dance to the tunes of others, we will never progress. We have to decide our destiny. We have to decide our strategy and then get others to dance to our destiny. Then also, Sri Lanka wish that any asset in our country cannot be exploited, used or misused by another power against another power. I think you all know what I'm talking about, right? We don't have the luxury of selling our national strategic assets to another country. We have to keep control.
The Foreign Secretary's line of thinking is not only accurate but is highly commendable. For many years, we have highlighted the importance of a country-centric foreign policy and the need to protect our own strategically valuable locations in the country. When there is increased attention on the need of a country-first foreign policy, we suggest that the exclusive economic zone of 517,000 square kilometers around the country be named the Sea of Sri Lanka.
When the British colonial rulers divided the subcontinent with random lines drawn on a map, they also went on to decide that the adjacent ocean would be called the Indian Ocean. And unless we move away from that colonial yoke and assert what is ours, we will never be truly independent.
Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is meeting his counterparts from Australia, India and Japan in Tokyo to discuss how to counter China. The Quad meeting comes as all four countries seek to form a front against an increasingly assertive China.
His first statement after assuming office, Prime Minister Suga described a free and open Indo-Pacific as, quote, the foundation of regional peace and stability, end of quote. I could not agree more.
Bilateral ties between the United States and China have in recent months plummeted to their lowest point in decades. This has led Washington to boost cooperation with regional allies.
菅政権においても地域や国際社会の平和と安定の礎であります日米同盟を一層強化していくという方針に変わりありません。
In local news, former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe has said that he was not invited to attend National Security Council meetings from the 26th of October 2018 to the 21st of April last year. The former Prime Minister made these remarks in his testimony at the Presidential Commission probing the April 21st attacks.
The testimony of the former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe began at around 10:15 this morning. Wickremesinghe told the Presidential Commission that Mahinda Rajapaksa, who served as Prime Minister during the brief change of government on the 26th of October 2018, had also not been invited to attend the National Security Council meetings. Leading the evidence, an additional Solicitor General raised questions on claims made by former President Maithripala Sirisena at the Commission yesterday that he had received the support of Wickremesinghe and the Cabinet only during the first 6 months in office. In response, the former Prime Minister said that Maithripala Sirisena had been nominated as a common candidate during the presidential election and that he had accepted the post of chairman in the Sri Lanka Freedom Party amidst objections raised by Venerable Madulu Ave Sobitathera at the time. The additional Solicitor General requested the witness to avoid providing a political response and questioned whether he had not supported the former president since he accepted the post of Sri Lanka Freedom Party chairman despite coming forward as a common candidate. In response, Wickremesinghe told investigators that Maithripala Sirisena had not received a large number of votes and that he did not command the support of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party as well. He added that former President Sirisena had constantly threatened to dissolve parliament during his term in office. Meanwhile, the witness told the Commission that the National Security Council had served as an advisory board to the President at that time. Wickremesinghe's testimony was adjourned until 4 p.m. on the 13th of October following a request made by his lawyers citing the medical condition of their client. The former Prime Minister's testimony had lasted for about 1.5 hours today.
ඔබතුමා මේ රටේ ප්‍රොසහස්සම දේශපාලකයෙක්. ඔබතුමා දේශපාලනේ සමුගරන් දින්නේ මේ දවස්වල. ඔබතුමා දේශපාලනේ පරදිනවා, පක්ෂේ අර්බුද එනවා. ඉන් පස්සේ කොමිසම් වලට කැඳවනවා. ගහෙන් වටු මිනිහට ගොනා යන්න දෙයිද මේ වෙන්නේ?
Cabinet approval has been granted to present the appropriation bill for the financial year of 2021 with an estimated state expense of 4,906 billion rupees.
It has been estimated that recurrent expenditure for the next year would amount to 2,690 billion rupees, while capital expenditure will stand at 1,146 billion rupees. The appropriation bill, which includes expenditure estimates and borrowing limits, is due to be tabled in Parliament next month. Meanwhile, Cabinet approval has also been granted to present in Parliament the expenditure estimates of the two supplementary estimates which were presented for the 2020 financial year, and also the expenditure which was incurred based on the powers vested with the President during the same year.
Meanwhile, a debate took place in Parliament today regarding the current economic situation in the country.
According to Moody's, the sovereign rating of Sri Lanka has dropped by 2 notches from a high debt risk country to a very high debt risk country. This downgrading took place in a very decisive time period for Sri Lanka. Between 2020 and 2025, Sri Lanka has to pay a debt service of $4 billion annually. Paying this foreign debt through local reserves is an unfavorable course of action. This year, we can expect the budget deficit to exceed 10%. However, the government has not informed the public on how to cover this deficit. If we fail to pay off foreign debt, we might have to face a situation like what Argentina faced recently. And under such a situation, we will not be able to reverse effects such as the rise of interest rates, the depreciation of the rupee, and the rising of the cost of living. In the same manner, Sri Lanka has so far controlled the interest rates by printing more money, and this inevitably caused a rise in inflation and economic instability. What are the policy-based decisions the government is hoping to take and have taken to maintain the government debt in a suitable manner?
Moody's, regardless of what Moody's says, the foreign investors have increased their faith in the country.
I will answer the way I want, so please listen. Please have the patience to listen.
Please don't disturb the House. You have been in this Parliament for several years. This new minister is answering the questions in Parliament as the State Minister. You have to give him the opportunity to do that.
This is not the answer they expect, but I have to provide the answer. If I hurt your feelings, I apologize. Within the past 2 months, we saw an increase in reserves. We expect to increase the reserves in the coming months. Our country had a median growth rate of 6.8%. It was reduced to 2.3% during the previous regime. As a median, it was at 3.7%.
You are talking about a massive economic growth.
It was construction driven. There was no huge growth in the country, no production drive.
It was a very temporary thing.
We were the first to enter the bond marketplace. We know the right time to enter it. They did it during the wrong times, and there were when they spent massive interest rates. I think I will table that as well. It is good for the perusal of some members. During this time, all central banks have printed more money than the required amount. We admit it. During the pandemic, if they were in power, it would be worse. It ruined the country. At one point you say the interest rate is high, and at another point you say the interest rate is low.
I questioned about the interest rates with regard to senior citizens, not with regards to industries or any other field. Therefore, please provide the answer without derailing from the topic.
We have been considerate regarding senior citizens. We are providing an interest rate of 15%, and if 5% is being paid by the banks, 10% is borne by the government.
By tomorrow, senior citizens will be receiving a 15% in the government, according to Minister Cabral. Is that true? We request Minister Cabral to thoroughly inform Vijaydas Rajapaksa, Vidura Vikramanayake and Vimal Weerawansa from that side regarding the question posed by the Auditor General and other related facts.
They had sent questions worth 4 pages to the office. We changed the font and reduced it to 2 pages and returned. This is how the opposition leader works. He does not know the rules.
Why don't you show me in the regulations where it says you can only submit 2 pages and not 4?
If you weaved a carpet of questions, we should answer those questions. The government can answer these questions.
We can't answer questions you want. Maybe there was a time when people asked questions you wanted.
Arjuna Ranatunga has decided to step down as the Gampaha district leader of the United National Party. Addressing a letter to the leader of the United National Party, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Ranatunga notes it is unsuitable for the newly appointed deputy leader of the UNP, Ruwan Wijewardena, to function under him in the Gampaha district. Ranatunga has therefore decided to step down as the district leader of Gampaha for the United National Party. And that's a wrap of Primetime News for tonight. For the Newsfirst team, I am Azra Hassan with our sign language interpreter, Brian D. Cruz. Thank you for joining us. Take care and good night.